I'd like to talk about astrology and our shadow side. Many people are intrigued by the idea of having a shadow, but what actually is the shadow? And how can we use it to transform ourselves? I'm going to talk about different ways to understand the shadow through fairy tales, psychology, alchemy and astrology, all in 5 minutes, and how we can use the knowledge of our shadow through astrology to transform ourselves and hence our lives. And as we do so, we gain in power, we develop gifts, we become more of our full potential, and ultimately we can fulfill destiny. So psychology and fairy tales. Carl Jung, the great psychologist, explained that fairy tales are not just a lovely story for children and the young at heart. They are actually a map of the psyche. So they're a map, all the characters and what happens to them are a map of the inner dynamics of all of us when we undergo the experiences of life, particularly challenges. So we all have within us the same witch, the same stupid giant, the same inner characters, and what happens to them is reflective of changes within us. And interestingly, it's always the encounter with the darker characters in a fairy tale that leads to the protagonist or the hero going through a period of growth, gaining power, and ultimately fulfilling some kind of higher destiny. So a little bit about what the shadow might feel like. The shadow, if you've ever been through a period of your life or through a lot of your life where you've felt overwhelmed with feelings of anxiety, fear, self-doubt, insignificance, inadequacy, then you are living within the realm of the shadow in your psyche. And yet, it's this shadow, this encounter with your difficulties within and your difficulties without, mirrored by those inner self-doubts, that holds our power. And in fairy tales, this is symbolised by the magical object. So usually the darker characters have some kind of magical object, like in The Wizard of Oz, the witch has a broom and some magical shoes, and usually by the end of the story it's the hero or the main character symbolising the self, us, that we gain that magical item. The hero gains the magical item and therefore the power connected with the shadow. What I also love about the shadow is that it's literally where we feel most fearful, insignificant, restricted, that we have our greatest gift. If we think of the story of The Wizard of Oz, the three characters in the story, the Tin Man, the Lion and the Scarecrow, all feel that they're missing an inner quality. So the Scarecrow doesn't think he has a brain, the Tin Man doesn't think he has a heart, and the Lion doesn't think he has any courage. And it's in walking the pathway of life, symbolically the yellow brick road in the story, that those three characters realise that actually they have a really big heart, a really good brain, and a lot of courage. And so we have a special gift where our shadow lies. In alchemy too, it can teach us a bit more about the shadow. So alchemy was the ancient art of transforming lead into gold, but the true alchemy that they were symbolising was the transformation of the unconscious in ourselves into the light of consciousness, becoming more than we were. And psychology tells us too that it's the integration of the shadow that is the key, one of two key parts of the journey to wholeness, which is symbolised by Carl Jung as the self with a capital S. And that self could be said to be your place where you express all of your characteristics readily, that you have developed a lot of your gifts, a lot of your potential. Another way of looking at it might be where you're aligning yourself with your higher self, so you have more of the power of your higher self in your life. And it's this integration of your shadow that's an essential part of the journey to reaching that higher part of yourself, or more integrated part of yourself. I'd like to give you an example of how I found out about my shadow using astrology, how I then used that knowledge to transform myself, and then I'll talk a little bit about how you can find out about your shadow side. When I was 27, it was about 1993, I found a book called A New Look at an Old Devil by Liz Green. She's one of the top psychological astrologers in the world, and I really recommend the book. It's called A New Look Saturn, A New Look at an Old Devil. And there in black and white, I was shocked and amazed to read all of the fear and pain and challenges that I'd had throughout my life. And it was a very painful experience to actually face the fact that yes, I was lacking in these areas, that yes, I was inadequate in these areas. And yet at the same time, it showed me what the potential was, what I needed to develop in order to overcome the shadow, and what the gifts of my shadow are. For me, my shadow is in Aries, and the way you can tell your shadow is where the planet Saturn is in your chart. Interestingly, with alchemy, that an old word for lead was Saturnine. So lead and Saturn are all associated with the unconscious. So my male energy was in the unconscious, and that's your will, your strength, your self-assertion, your direction in life, and your sense of power within yourself. And that was all missing for me. It was locked up in the unconscious. As a result, I experienced a lot of very strong male energy in my direction, a lot of feelings of powerlessness. And that helps us to understand a key thing about the nature of reality, and that is that as we integrate our shadow, the outer experiences change. We don't get nearly so many what I call shadow boxing. So long as your shadow is in the unconscious, then Maya, or your outer reality, has that energy and it acts upon you. And as you integrate, then you are owning the positive aspects of your shadow, and the outer experiences alter. And the more and more you integrate your shadow and practice the positive qualities of your shadow, the more sophisticated challenges and you take on in your life, or that come to you, that you can successfully master, and you're able to move closer and closer to what I might call a destiny. Carl Jung called it a process of individuation, where you become more and more who you're meant to be. So for me, because my shadow's in Aries, what I had to develop was courage, will, physical strength, self-assertion, because that was what was lacking in me. And I actually had one key shadow experience. I was working for the military as a civilian, and I was feeling a little bit bullied and pushed around by the people at work. And I was meditating at the time, which really helps, and I also was recording my dreams, and I got the feeling that I should really try and stand up for myself. And I did so, and I sort of kicked up a big fuss at work. It was really messy, really painful and uncomfortable. But it was an incredible moment in my life, because I realised afterwards what I'd done is released and accessed the shadow energy. And I moved out of that job as a result into another job. But what really happened was that I released this energy, which then for the rest of my life I've been able to use to initiate lots and lots of changes, to carry out lots and lots and lots of challenges and activities that develop my positive shadow side. And now, 25 years on, I'm really, really different person to I was 25 years ago. Very, very different. In fact, most of what I do now is an expression of this, a positive side of my shadow. Developing and working on your shadow is not only really, really powerful and important for our own development and movement into higher consciousness in some way, but also it's really, really good for other people, because the hidden side of our shadow is that it does act on others and we're not often aware of it. So have you ever noticed that sometimes people will suddenly react to you really strongly and negatively, or they'll drop out of your life and they won't tell you why, and you've got no idea, because you think, I'm a really nice person and I've done nothing wrong. The trouble with the shadow is that we actually do and say things that we're not fully conscious of, and that those actions and words can impact very powerfully on other people. And we're on the receiving end of other people's shadows, just as they're on the receiving end of ours. And this lack of conscious awareness of what we're doing or saying is one of the major causes, as I see it, in conflict between people. So this one of the stories that shows us how problematic our shadow can be is the story of Jekyll and Hyde. And Dr. Jekyll began taking a drug that he started to find released this very negative Mr. Hyde, which did all sorts of bad things when he was on the drug, and then he'd go back to being nice Dr. Jekyll. And this story is very symbolic of the shadow, and how if we allow ourselves to stay too much in unconscious behaviours, such as too many drugs, too much alcohol, too many addictions of any kind in our lives, or anything that lowers our consciousness, like sticking our head in the sand and trying not to face the problems in our life, or perhaps the challenges of our inner world. And if we stick up, all of these things that we do to reduce our consciousness can lead to the shadow gaining traction. In the fairy tales, for example, in The Wizard of Oz, at the beginning, the witch is ruling the land of Oz, and Oz symbolises our inner world. So at the beginning, it's our fears and doubts and inadequacies and perhaps negative actions that are ruling our inner world and outer world. But as we develop and integrate our shadow, it's the centre of ourselves that begin to be in charge, and we have, as part of that, the power that lies in our shadow at our disposal, and that our outer expressions become more and more dynamic and expressive of our gifts and of our potential. So I hope you found that useful. We've looked at what is the shadow according to fairy tales, psychology, alchemy and astrology, and how, looking at astrology, we can understand the personal nature of our own shadow. Fairy tales can tell us about the general shadow within us all and how our inner dynamics work as we go through challenges, whereas astrology can tell us specifically about what is my inner witch like, what are the qualities of my shadow, and what are the positive gifts and qualities of my shadow that I can consciously work on in my life to help to facilitate my spiritual growth or my path of individuation towards the self, which is how Jung phrases it, or in alchemy, how I can consciously cooperate on working on transforming my unconscious into the conscious. If you'd like to learn a little bit more, I do recommend Liz Green's book, A New Look at an Old Devil. You can also look at the website astro.com to look up your astrological chart, although you may need someone to help you understand some of the symbols in it if you don't know the language of astrology. I do also offer short shadow readings for £5. If you PayPal me with £5, within a week I will send you your shadow reading. It's at half price at the moment, normally it's £10. If you would like a full astrological reading, I also do those for £20 that I will pass on to you within 2 weeks if you send me £20. So the link is at the bottom and or along with my Facebook page as well. Please like this page and share if you can. Thank you.